Who were the cruelest historical figures? Others will name dictators, but they'd rarely partake in the torture. People like Gilles de Rais or Ivan the Terrible, on the other hand, would actively rape, torture and murder even kids. I learned about Gilles through comic books. Believe it was called Tristan. Worst thing is he's portrayed as a nice guy in the comics with just a strange hobby. Belgian fantasy comic De Roodridder, the Red Knight, had a two-parter with de Rais as a character. At least they were wise enough to portray him as a villain. He even works for the devil in that comic, planning to make Jeanne d'Arc drink from the Judas Grail so that her soul will be lost. Gilles de Rais is a definite contender, assuming the charges against him were true. I'm sure some were, some may have been trumped up to discredit and ruin his name. But if even a tenth were true, he was an evil monster. Let's not forget Elizabeth Bathory and what she did to young women, children, really. She and Rice's actions were probably exaggerated, but there were a lot of witnesses in those trials, so that's one case where the tragedy is that it likely wasn't a kangaroo court. Bathory's accusers stood to gain from her arrest, and there's slim to no supporting evidence for her supposed crimes except in the letters and writings of those exact same accusers. She was known for being extremely devout and ran into conflict as a Calvinist in an increasingly Catholic social landscape, as well as being a wealthy female widow, so wealthy that even the Habsburgs had borrowed from her at one point, and quite a few powerful nobles either owed her or stood to gain her properties should she be out of the way. Modern scholars increasingly believe that the charges were fabricated and the trial a farce. The book Infamous Lady, The True Story of Countess Ursabet Bathory by Kimberly L. Craft is very good on this. I've also been reading her diaries and letters, which are fascinating. She's a very compelling and unfortunately long maligned woman. I'm currently reading that book actually. It's insanely interesting, the fresh perspective it gives on her and the historical circumstances surrounding everything at the time. Everyone close to her and close to her husband kept betraying the Habsburgs as well, which certainly didn't help her by association. What really sealed it for me is how she's mysteriously lacking a family archive, despite that being the common thing for noble families to have at the time. Not to mention that she herself was known to be very thorough in holding on to important documents and letters. A lot of these documents and letters that do remain were found in the archives of the family majorly responsible for her arrest and trial as well. Pol Pot. This is the correct answer. He completely destroyed Cambodia's society to no benefit, in a nihilistic, ever-widening gyre of violence that killed over 1.5 million people in less than 4 years, more than 25% of Cambodia's population. I recently read a book about the Khmer Rouge. His hypocrisy was astounding. He was raised by parents who were in the royal court and educated in Paris. From Moulin Rouge to Khmer Rouge. It has possibilities, a comedy musical about atrocities? Like Springtime for Hitler. Needs to be a 70s period piece with a roller skate dance number and an all-disco soundtrack. Well, Mel Brooks is still alive. An important part of the story is how the genocide stopped. The Cambodian genocide killed Viets, so Vietnam invaded them, stopping the genocide. Then China invaded Vietnam so that Cambodia could continue the genocide. Stalin and Mao said, "Hold my beer." People always jump to Stalin and Mao in the question of the worst people in history, but that's not what this post is. This post asked the cruelest person. And since such massive parts of Stalin and Mao's body count can be chalked up to their incompetence and indirect action, I'm not sure cruelest applies. I don't think it'll be any of the big-name big body count dictators who take this cake, but someone very on the ground in the thick of things. One of the ones who actively revealed in hurting people up close. Lavrentiy Beria, Stalin's chief of the NKVD or secret police, has to be one of the nastier figures in history. He didn't just take part in the orchestration of Stalin's Great Purge, he actively carried out some of the murders himself. He also proposed and arranged the murder of 22,000 Polish army officers, what became known as the Katyn Massacre. If that wasn't enough, he was also a serial rapist. He would be driven around the streets of Moscow in his limousine looking for young women to kidnap and rape, many of whom he then murdered. After his death, human remains belonging to his victims were found buried in his wife's rose garden. Iwane Matsui, the general behind the Nanjing Massacre. The one responsible was Prince Asaka. The Japanese troops in Nanjing at the time were under his command. And he gave the order to kill all captives, which was the official sanction for the Nanjing Massacre. Matsui was kind of a scapegoat. I think it's fair to say Matsui bears responsibility. He certainly seemed to think so. From his sentencing, the tribunal is satisfied that Matsui knew what was happening. He did nothing, or nothing effective to abate these horrors. He did issue orders before the capture of the city enjoining propriety of conduct upon his troops, and later he issued further orders to the same purport. These orders were of no effect, as is now known, and as he must have known. He was in command of the army responsible for these happenings. He knew of them. He had the power, as he had the duty, to control his troops and to protect the unfortunate citizens of Nanking. He must be held criminally responsible for his failure to discharge this duty. His final words to his lawyer after his conviction at the Tokyo War Crimes trials is about as damning, that he knew what was going on and didn't stop it, as it is that Matsui was not the primary instigator. The Nanjing incident was a terrible disgrace. Immediately after the memorial services, I assembled the higher officers and wept tears of anger before them as commander-in-chief. I told them that after all our efforts to enhance the imperial prestige, everything had been lost in one moment through the brutalities of the soldiers. And can you imagine it, even after that, these officers laughed at me. I am really, therefore, quite happy that I, at least, should have ended this way, in the sense that it may serve to urge self-reflection on many more members of the military of that time. Matsui was guilty, but he was also made to shoulder all the blame for the massacre. Prince Asaka was part of the imperial house and granted immunity. His aide, who issued the massacre orders, killed himself during the fall of Saipan. By the end of the war, China was demanding someone pay for what happened in the rape of Nanking, and Matsui was the only man still standing who could be made to pay for it. Please like and subscribe for more daily content.